And like things kind of shift, and he looks at me and he points right here. And he said this, there's a demon in your house. And he says, basically this thing is trying to kill you. And so I called my wife and I'm like, you got to get everybody out of the house. You're going to pull up the floor and you're going to see a skeleton that's been sacrificed. My daughter, who was 2 or 3, went into that room when we were touring the house for the first time, looked into the mirror that was there, and in a demonic voice said, get out of my house. I start confessing some things to the guys that nobody knew. It was like the veil was lifted and I got to see how evil Satan was. And in an instant, everything broke. All of this was brought to light in 2018. I was doing marriage counseling, still struggling with substances. And I had been through rehab. I was off Adderall and pain pills, but I was still seeking to numb out. And I was sitting with this couple and I was doing marriage counseling. And this couple didn't know me very well. In fact, they'd never been to our house. They were definitely weird. I mean, I'm weird, they're weird, and they're just a little off. As Apostle George would say, they're just a little off. And what they didn't know is at home, there was a weight that was at home. At the time, I felt like I was married to a Jezebel, living with a Jezebel, which was my mother-in-law at the time. And so there was a darkness, a heaviness, and a weight that was at my house. My children were fighting. There was constant strife. And at night, I had been getting tortured through sleep paralysis, feeling like literally I was going to die, that something was trying to choke me. And I just thought it was part of the process of the substances that I was using. And so I was really struggling and I was crying out for help. I'd been through so much hell with my family. I made so many mistakes. I didn't want to do the things that I was doing. I wanted freedom. And my house was the most demonically oppressed place that I'd ever experienced. But I didn't know it. I just thought it was me. That spiritual sensitivity that I talked about was there. It was in operation, and I was using substances to mask it. Whether it's a process, whether was masturbation, whether it was whatever it was to cope with what I was experiencing, I did it. And I'm sitting here the night before, feeling like I'm getting choked out. Nobody knows it, struggling behind closed doors, but yet I'm still labeled as a professional pastor. And I'm doing a marriage counseling session, and in the middle of it, this guy looks at me, and like things kind of shift, and he looks at me and he points right here to my chest. And he said this, he said, there's a demon in your house. There's a demon that's attached to you right here. And what he didn't know is that was the exact spot that I felt like I was being stabbed. Now remember, I don't have a grid for this. So I don't have an understanding of really what's going on. But when he said that, and he began to explain what he saw at my house, he went through a series of explanations. He said, there's a demon in your house. It's in your attic. And it's also in your second bedroom in the closet. So there's 2 demons that are there. And he says, basically this thing is trying to kill you, and it's coming after your family. All of a sudden, the veil removed and I could see. And he was telling me what was there. And it was like my eyes were open. And I knew what he was saying was the truth. And he's like, you need 2 people. You need Steve and you need Apostle George. He described them exactly. He didn't know them. He's never met them, did not even know they existed, but he described them. He's like, you need these 2 men that need to go with you, and you need to go deal with it. And one of the things he said to do, you go up in the attic, under the skylight, in the floor, you're going to pull up the floor and you're going to see a skeleton that's been sacrificed. And when you do that, you need to take it outside and burn it. In your closet, you need to take it. He just said you need to deal with the demon that's in your closet. And he said there's one more spot outside that's beside a red barn. There's a burn spot that's there. Never been to my house, and described it exactly the way that it was. And as he described this, my adrenaline started pumping, and I'm like, I have an answer to something that I did not know I needed to have. And so I called my wife, and I'm like, you got to get everybody out of the house. And she has no grid for this as well at this time. And I was like, you got to get everybody out of the house. And she thought there was like a gas leak or something like that. Like she thought it was like really, really physical. And so she got out of the house, and I called Apostle George and Steve, and they met me in the house. And what started to happen at my house, I started to begin to see all of the like breadcrumbs that the Lord had left behind. All of the feelings, the dreams, the sensitivity, the running through the house, the feeling of a presence. And one of the things that started to unfold was when we first looked at this house, my daughter, who at the time was 2 or 3, and I was high, we were looking at this house in the same bedroom that he said that there was a demon in. My daughter, who was 2 or 3, went into that room when we were touring the house for the first time, looked into the mirror that was there, and in a demonic voice said, "Get out of my house." And my wife and I looked at each other and did at the time what we normally do. We pretended that we didn't see that. I thought it was me, so I didn't make a big deal. I thought it was like the substance I was on. And turned out that was the same closet that he had pointed out. So all of the pieces were fitting together. And so I called two men, and they met me there, and I'm going through the house, and I'm seeing everything. And it's like I am literally freaking out. Now there's a 3-sided story that needs to be told at a later date. But Apostle George has his version, and Steve has his version, and it's really comical. I'm not telling you the comical version of it. I'm just telling you the raw version. But when I walked into the house, I went up into the attic. I pulled up the floor, and sure enough, there was a skeleton that was under the skylight. We took it outside. We burned it. I didn't know how to do this, but Apostle George walked me through what it looks like to cleanse your house, and does it take authority? I was trying to get them to do it. They're like, no, you live here. And so went through and took authority and commanded everything to leave. One of the places that we went to was back in the attic, and it was like 110 degrees. And as we're in the attic, I start confessing some things to the guys that nobody knew. And so they prayed for me. And as they prayed for me, I felt things coming out of me. Deliverance was happening. I didn't understand it at the time, but literally I was feeling and seeing demons leave me. And in an instant, everything broke. Everything shifted. And as we prayed outside, as we worshiped like crazy people beside the red barn with the burning sacrifice that everybody probably would have been like, what the heck is going on in your yard? As we burned this and worshiped God, it was like the veil was lifted, and I got to see how evil Satan was. And then all the pieces were confirmed. I wasn't crazy. I was really experiencing these things, and that pressure point left. And my house immediately shifted. Up until that point, I struggled with masturbation every night. From the time of being 5 years old, I was sexually molested multiple times from 5 to the age of 9. And one of the ways that I coped with stress was that. And so it's something that nobody knew. they'll carry the most shame. Some of the things that I confessed shed light on some of those things I just described. And as I got deliverance from that day, I never did it again. Instantly delivered, completely set free, not even a temptation to go back. We're talking 28 years or so, maybe longer, of a struggle that was one of the deepest parts of shame for me. And it was instantly delivered. And so as this happened, and as I'm processing this with the guys, I'm like, what the heck? What the heck has happened? And as I left there and I had to go and teach like John 12 to the senior adults at a traditional Baptist church. And as I go and teach, I'm like, how am I going to shift gears? What does this look like? My whole grid for life changed completely. Everything that I knew was, it was like, it shifted. My wife had no grid. She came back and all she said was the house felt different. Everything in my life that I thought was real was not. Or there was more. And I couldn't unsee what I saw. Jesus says, if I cast out demons by the finger of God, then surely the kingdom of God has come upon you. Well, I saw darkness, the demonic kingdom manifest in me personally, and I felt and experienced the change immediately. And I was saying to myself that this is what it's like to experience freedom and deliverance. Everybody else needs to experience this. So I went on a rampage for the next few months, searching for more demons, cleansing our house, finding other areas, and come to find out we had a paranoid schizophrenic guy who was demonically tortured by Legion who lived in my house. And he had lost a daughter, not in the house, but literally went crazy and set his house up as a battle station and was a self-proclaimed HOA leader who rode around on a horse, exposing his guns and threatening everybody. And so the story of what really had happened in this house that we lived in was not only just for us, but it was territorial. This guy regionally, spiritually controlled the area. And what God meant, what Satan meant for evil, God was now going to use for his glory. A demonic portal had been closed, had been shifted, and now a heavenly portal was being opened. A well that had been dug was being tapped into. And I had no clue, had no idea that this was possible. And the things that I've been searching for my whole life, I saw them. And as I begin to see things as they really are, I got to see how Satan had deceived everybody around me. I got to see how, like movies, Disney, I got to see the music industry, how twisted and demonic all of this was. And as my wife heard the stories of what happened, she didn't experience it for herself. And it was 3 years later, I was pursuing God, going after him with everything I had. And I had experienced him in like 6 months later, where he met me in my car while she was driving, and his presence just filled the car, and I shook and cried for like an hour, and he burned everything out of me. And in that moment, he took up residence, like the spirit of adoption just landed on me, and I knew that I knew him as Father. And I didn't eat for 4 days. And so I experienced the demonic freedom, but then I experienced the impartation, the baptism, the infilling of the Spirit. And now there was power. There was clarity. There was intimacy. And so as I had conversations with people who were struggling, I began to see all around me how twisted the demonic activity had become. And this just happened to be around Halloween. And as I saw what this holiday was, I could not unsee what I just experienced. And I started digging. Into the occult. I started digging into masonry. I started seeing the connection between the Southern Baptist Church and the Masons. And the church that I was serving in, 6 out of 7 deacons were Masons. And I began to see the correlation, and it was like, I'm going through something. It's like a rabbit trail. Like, do I really want to go down this area, this hole? And the more I talked about it, the more I got to see, like, it wasn't just for me. It was for other people. And I found myself one Halloween night talking with a group of youth who had just celebrated Halloween. And I was telling them the story of what had just happened. And as I'm telling them the story, they're manifesting. They're shaking and they're responding. And it's like demons were starting to respond to being identified. And so I started digging. What is really Halloween about? What is this holiday really rooted and grounded in? And you can't really just identify Halloween without dealing with all of the other holidays, but this one in particular was filled with fear. And I could see the effects that it was doing to the people around me. And it wasn't just the holiday in itself and just dressing up. There was everything that surrounded it. And I began asking the most dangerous question that you could ever ask. Why? Why do we do what we do? Why do we celebrate what we celebrate? Why do we dress up? Why do we give out candy? Why do we carve pumpkins? Why is the black cat a thing? Why do we do haunted houses and all this kind of stuff? And I couldn't find anything that was good in it. So I'm asking the question, like, why do we do it? So this happens for 3 years, and my family still continues to somewhat celebrate Halloween because my wife hasn't experienced what I've experienced, and so it's hard for her to really relate, and it's understandable. And so we backed off from the really gruesome things. But when we took a group of youth, which you guys have probably heard this story, but when we took a group of youth to a summer camp and we got them away from the religious bubble, they confessed their deepest, darkest secrets. And when they confessed their deepest, darkest secrets, demons then began to manifest. And what I experienced, which was literally the same thing, confession, then manifestation, I got to see them experience what I was doing. And my wife is looking at me and she's like, "You're not crazy. Like, this is real." And we got to take a bunch of youth through deliverance. And they were ministering to each other. Revival just exploded. And for 7 days, worshiping and glorifying God. We were at a summer beach in Panama City, and nobody really wanted to go outside. And when they did, it was a student-led Bible study that happened. And so we experienced the more of God, and God used a tool of deliverance to shed light on what was really going on in the dark. And that's when everything changed.